Thank you for coming. This is our Indonesia Study Group seminar. Today we'll have Dr. Tricia Wijaya speaking about green developmentalism. But first of all, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional land we meet, and pay my respect to elders past and present. The topic today, as I said, it's on green developmentalism in Indonesia. And Dr. Tricia Wijaya is with us. She's visiting Indonesia project this month. She is a senior research fellow at Rich American University, honorary research fellow at Murdoch University, and soon will be with Melbourne University starting April next year. Tricia will be speaking for about 45 to 1 hour, and then we will follow up with question and answer. This is a hybrid event, so welcome to those of you online. And if you have questions, please write your questions on the question and answer box. Due to technology, we cannot answer directly, but I will read your question afterward. Okay, so without further ado, Tricia.
Thank you, Acho. I should stand here, right? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone attending the session in person as well as online friends. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for having me here in the springtime, but actually it's feel like more like winter, but anyway. Today I'm going to present my preliminary findings on... Oh yeah. Today I'm going to present my preliminary finding on the nickel politics in Indonesia. As you can see from the slides, the title is A Winning and Willing Green Coalitions. This is one of my favorite expressions that I borrowed the wisdom from Peter Newells and Matthew Patterson, based in UK. They wrote a book on green politics. So the idea here is that the ideal is winning and willing green coalitions. For us to push transformation, push for energy transition, you need not only need a coalitions that is willing to pursue energy transition, but also need to have coalitions that also win over energy transition, meaning that they are beneficiaries of the climate transition or energy transition program in whatever country they are based at. And in Indonesia, that's the entry points that I'm going to start with. Who are these winning and willing green coalition in Indonesia? And how they affect the international landscape of green transition, not only how international regimes or global energy transition affect these domestic political coalitions, but also how the responses and any policy options emerging out the Indonesian government affect the international landscape. So this is the outline of my presentation today. First, I will start introducing the pattern of green financing and the rise of the EV and battery industry in Indonesia, follow with global political economy and reorganizations of interest through the EV industry. And the next one is selective de-risking, one of the concepts that I built upon Daniela Geber on de-risking strategy in Europe. And follow with conclusion and inquiry. So overall, this paper actually is built upon the previous one that was published in Environmental Politics on EV fix. And half part of this presentation right now is manifested in one manuscript, which is under review. So I will appreciate if anyone here attending in person and online do not cite the content of this paper without any permission first, because it's still undergoing and under review. Okay, so what's wrong with the green developmentalist strategy in Indonesia? So over the past few years, I know that we have been in COVID fatigue. We should stop hearing about COVID, and thanks God it happened. We stopped listening to any COVID politics. Now we are hearing more about energy politics, battery politics, and more importantly about green developmentalist strategies, not only in Indonesia, but also in Southeast Asia. entirely. But in Indonesia itself, the green developmentalist strategy is repackaged as if it is a new growth strategy that is based upon decarbonization program with strong state intervention. So that's at least in a nutshell, that's how it's being repackaged by the Jokowi government, at least the second term of Jokowi's administrations. But what's wrong with that? So the first one, ideally, the key pillar of our green transition regime in Indonesia, it's being covered, but it should be supposed to be. Green transition regime in Indonesia is supposed to be. That's why I say it's supposed to be, because it's not being materialized until now. So the key pillar of it is Indonesian state-owned electricity company who hold monopoly rights over transmission and distributions of electricity in Indonesia. For all energy transition program, be it green infrastructure or renewable supply chain, must be following PLN's Indonesian National Electricity Supply Business Plan, which is in Indonesia we call it RUPTL, Rencana Umum. I forgot the P in Indonesia, but anyway, it's RUPTL. Should be the basic, and this is like the holy Bible in Indonesia for all the foreign investors who want to invest in renewable energy in Indonesia. They should double check on the RUPTL, and they should look at which one is unsolicited project, which one is the solicited project, and what's the government aim for the next 5 years. So at the first glance, it looks so ideal. As you can see from the 2019 to 2023, 28, the government committed to pass down the fossil fuel power plants from 39,000 megawatts to almost half of it, 19,000 megawatts. And then commit to build more renewable power plants by 2030 that consists of almost 20,923 megawatt, with the breakdown on the left-hand side. Oh, sorry, right-hand side, the geothermal, hydropower, solar power, wind power plant, etc., etc. And even more importantly and interestingly, it's just being issued last week or a couple of weeks ago that the government is trying to finalize the RUPTL, the newest one with renewable energy, 75% and gas 25% of all the energy sources in Indonesia. Although it's still very interesting to see how the gas still be incorporated to the energy plan in Indonesia. But the problem here is more, not yet into the problem, but the reason why I want to show this is in order for us to, I just want to give audience here a little bit context so that we can have a better signposting later on in the next slide. So this is actually the power market structure in Indonesia, the technocratic system of renewable energy regime in Indonesia, if I may say. So there is a Ministry of Finance and then the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources and Ministry of,
Just minimize.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Ministry of State-owned Enterprises, because it has PLN as the key stakeholder here. And in a nutshell, it looks very ideal here, and we literally follow the regulatory reform market disciplines from the World Bank, the ADB. We have Ministry of Finance. We will approve subsidies, compensations for any de-risking projects that the developing country were advised to do by the World Bank, like the discipline, fiscal discipline for state guarantee, etc., etc. And we also have Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, who provide technical guidance, and of course, Ministry of State-owned Enterprises. But still, the current power market structure in Indonesia still not allowed further liberalization. As we can see, the transmission and distribution and power cells are still under the control of PLN. And the private generation right now is still being limited in captive power plant and independent power producer, which is in the power generation itself that is mostly dominated by coal oligarchy and including Japanese, Chinese, and Korean investors as well. So okay, I'm just being passive aggressive here. I should not give coal green color, but at least that's what our government has been echoing so far. We do have green coal, that's what they say. So therefore, I still put the green color there. But as you can see, as of 2023, coal power plants are still dominating the energy sources in Indonesia. 40%. And 30% only renewable only occupy 30% of the power structure in Indonesia, and gas 16%, which they expect to increase by 2030, and the rest of that is oil. So it's still dominated by fossil fuel energy. But at the same time, we do have some amazing achievement, which is on the right-hand side. Our nickel export value keep increasing. So this one before COVID time. Oh, I do have this right. Okay. Oh, how to use this? Sorry. Okay. So the nickel export value keep increasing, but what's the most striking here is this one, MHP, the one that is coming from HPAL smelter, the battery grade nickel in Indonesia. And this is thanks to Chinese technology and capital. Right now we have at least 3 HPAL smelter are already in operation in Indonesia, while at least there are more 5 or 6 smelter under construction. And all of them are HPAL, and the competitive edge of HPAL is that it's able to convert our lower grade nickel ore to battery grade nickel, which is used for electric vehicle, energy storage, etc., etc. But before COVID time, actually what Chinese dominate over our industry is only limited to iron and ferronickel, which is at least already quite higher value added, even though perhaps Pak Acho and Riyandi perhaps will not agree here, but at least it helped Indonesian industry added value to the raw material itself. So as you can see, this is the core. This is the main achievements that China at least helped Indonesia to boost their industrialization, whatever the government called downstreaming. Okay, this is still in million USD. I don't know exactly how much is it in terms of metric tons, but this is in million USD. I don't know what's wrong with my slide, but this table, I got the data from Mandala Consulting, which is apparently based in Canberra as well. And then I just recalculate the amount, and this is what the table represents today. So please keep in mind about this MHP, because this will be the core arguments that I'm going to presenting over the next few minutes. So my question so far, I know there are a lot of questions because this is based on 2 papers. What have underpinned the renewed green developmentalist strategy in Indonesia? Because over the past 3 years, our green developmentalist purposes, policy options, and strategy are just shifting too fast from developing renewable energy project to developing smelter and battery grade nickels, and it's still being called green developmentalist strategy. And the second question is that through this green developmentalist strategy, who actually gets what and how? So this is the very basic political economic questions. And number 3, I think this is what the Chinese observers in the region are looking for. How should we contextualize Chinese capital in the deepening nexus of green transition and downstreaming? Because now it's getting obvious that downstreaming becomes central to national economic growth and strategy in Indonesia. And perhaps it's not only in Indonesia itself, even Philippines as well, the second largest nickel reserve in Southeast Asia. They also aim for downstreaming through the US-led Mineral Security Partnership. So this nexus of green transition downstreaming is not only Indonesian centric topic, but also a regional centric focuses as well that worthy of attention. Yeah, so this is what I call green coalitions. Perhaps some people still say it's brown coalitions, but we can't neglect the fact that they are really positioning themselves within the nexus of green developmentalist, decarbonization, or even resource nationalisms. So it's nickel after all. We are moving forward and advancing a green transition because through nickels we can develop our energy storage system, we can develop EV market, and then perhaps moving up value chain. That's at least how they position themselves. And who are they? So beforehand, I would like to just give a context, and I think I don't need 1 hour to explain about resource nationalisms. All of us here can just turn into Eve Warburton books on resource nationalism and find the details there. But this Article 33, line 3 of the 1945 Constitution states, the earth, water, and natural riches should be used by the state to maximize the prosperity of the people. So these resource nationalisms really gain traction, and it's also because of these resource nationalisms, extractive conglomerate Chinese capitals and well-connected elites managed to reorganize their interests and try to reposition their accumulation strategy within the new green transition agenda. And thanks to resource nationalisms as well, these extractive conglomerates and also local elites managed to get into the nickel upstream sector, which is mining sector, and try to benefit from Chinese-led smelter development because of this, the capacity of Chinese smelter to absorb the nickel supply. Then these conglomerates and local elites can get short-term benefits of it. So I will elaborate more details in the next slides, but at least this is the context of how resource nationalism fit into the new green developmentalist strategy of the country. Yeah, so everyone are actually asking whether is Indonesia really affected by the US Bidenomics IRA? But the answer is yes, because as we can see from the previous slide, okay, a bit slow. Yeah, Indonesia right now do have this MHP, the battery grade nickel, which is feeding the car industry, the EV car industry, both in Europe and in China. And also the Bloomberg recent article, 2024, if I'm not mistaken, is June articles, managed to investigate further how Indonesian nickel managed to get into the factory in Europe and in China, and even with Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Ford, through Chinese and South Korean companies. And China dominates around 90% of investment in downstream nickel production in Indonesia. And the main actor here are these 3 companies, Huayue, QMB New Energy Materials, and 2 of them based in Morowali, and Halmahera Persada Legend. Halmahera based in Weda Bay and owned by Harita Group. And interestingly, Harita Group right now, even thanks to the nickel boom in Indonesia, Harita Group used to be was still conglomerates in Indonesia, but over the past 2 years, Harita Group already climbed up the ladder and now become top, if I'm not mistaken, is 7 richest conglomerates in Indonesia, thanks to the nickel rush. So it's really work based on the benefits of particular extractive conglomerates. Yeah, so this is the data from Mandala Consulting to explain whether Indonesia is really moving up the value chain or not. And the black box is yes, it's still illustrate that the nickel, the material exists in Indonesia, and the white box indicates that the component is not yet exist in Indonesia, but it doesn't mean that it will not exist, but it's still undergoing or in developments. So this is what I mentioned about MHP, the sulfate nickel, which is the battery grade nickel in Indonesia that is being processed into battery. So right now this chain is still broken. It's not yet existing in Indonesia, but we believe that probably China will develop it as soon as possible, because there is a new factory, which is lithium factory, actually being inaugurated last month by Jokowi in Java. So we still need to wait and see, but at least this is the current development of nickel industry in Indonesia. But what interestingly, if we connect it with the global political economy of energy transition, our current value chain ecosystem was being challenged by a series of regulatory control from the global north, from the US, from the EU, and Bidenomics. Part of important components of Bidenomics is the Inflation Reduction Act and growing minded unilateralisms that, technically speaking, excluded Indonesia from this unilateralisms of security of critical minerals, such as mineral security partnership. And interestingly, there's even a report yesterday that on Monday, Mineral Security Partnership, third countries member even gather in the United States, and they even issue a new financing task force, want to de-risk nickel mines in 13 countries, and Philippines is among them, but exclude Indonesia. And one is EU battery regulation amendment that also use some social to exclude Indonesia, or not actually Indonesia, but Chinese-backed nickel produced in Indonesia, and using a lot of reason, including super due diligence mechanisms that black nickel from entering the market. But that how our government responds to this regulatory control so far, they barely enact any reforms and continues to rely on China. So even though last week Bahlil, sorry, I just mentioned the name bluntly, even though Bahlil, who's right now Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, just signed a new MOU with on the development of clean critical mineral, but still, it's still in the form of MOU, and there is not yet concrete response of from the key stakeholders in this nickel industry on how to respond to this ESG nickel amidst the wake of green transition at the global level. Why? It's because here we can see this need to be updated, but at least I just put the key stakeholder here. For the EV ecosystem, we got Virtue Dragon on the, and then Morowali, of course, the very powerful retired generals connected to Chinese capital, and then Weda by Harita Group with their Chinese concern as well, and Ford Foundation even being involved. And this is HPAL smelter that has been discussed elsewhere in the NGO and a lot of NGOs report media that led to environmental destruction because of energy intensive and also capital power plant that is being applied to power the smelter 7 days, 24 hours non-stop. And then we also have the battery cell factory that is being developed like Korean consortium along with our Mine ID, the Indonesian state-owned consortium as well. And downstream, the battery pack EV assembly has not been materialized yet because of local content requirement. But at least the government already opened the market for these Chinese companies to test out the water in the Indonesian market and ask their commitment to invest in Indonesia in the next couple of years. And for infrastructure, we do have the powerful state-owned enterprises to hold control over the EV infrastructure. So what I'm going to reinforce here is that, as you can see throughout the entire ecosystem, this is all the big companies in Indonesia who already have structural power that is very central to Indonesian national economic growth, and then as well as SOEs who are the political vehicles of Indonesia democratic regime as well, and including Chinese capital whose vertical integration can absorb the oversupply of nickel in Indonesia, and last but not least, the Korean companies who happen to be quite flexible in bridging Chinese and Indonesian capital. Okay, so in my research, I'm not really, due to limited funding and also human resources, I'm not having enough capacity like Project Multatuli to draw all the oligarch network in Indonesian nickel politics, but at least I borrow wisdom from them, and this data is quite useful for me to draw my core argument here and to substantiate my claim on the new social relations of productions. And as Indonesians in ANU and also friends online here who already follow Indonesian political economy over the past few decades, I think it's just like a public secret for us how the extractive SOEs and Chinese capital. Just forget the Chinese capital first. I mean the extractive conglomerates such as the pulp and palm oil in Indonesia, coal and gas company are very extractive, and then they even hold the structural power in Indonesia, and actually this nickel politics in Indonesia, the social relations of production, they just repeat the old patterns that already being deeply ingrained in Indonesian primitive modes of accumulations that we can easily find in palm oil production, in the coal industry, etc., etc. These sectors are the most sectors that fund our election, democratic institutions, and money politics. And they also hold important power for the executive elites in Jakarta. So as powerful as they are, their power are now being extended to this nickel industry. And whatever taken together, all the activities they did in Indonesia resulted in the perpetuations of early rounds of primitive accumulation in Indonesia. And thanks to Chinese capital and technology that are really dovetailing well with this interest of powerful conglomerates, and we can already see the creation of loose alliances, local elites in Sulawesi, in Maluku, and emerging business groups, for example, retired politicians, but now become the nickel business permit holders, like in Maluku called Beni Laos, security apparatus, retired generals, or even just policemen who doesn't want to go to Jakarta to be promoted, but opt to stay in Sulawesi to extract more money, thanks to nickel mining opening. And another brokerage groups whose name cannot be mentioned. Yeah, so this is the very domestic relations in Indonesia that actually reshape the nickel productions and the EV industry at a broader scale, how they link to Chinese capital and how Chinese capital dovetail well with the interests of extractive conglomerates and their loose alliances in Indonesia. Why I say Chinese accommodate and dovetail well? So I will skip here first. So I will give you some context. This is based on my preliminary findings. My recent visit in Sulawesi Tenggara, near Kendari, which is Konawe and Konawe Utara. So Konawe Utara here, Mandiodo. So Mandiodo, when we were struggling with COVID time, actually Mandiodo enjoyed nickel boom. So here the Mandiodo hosts a lot of both illegal mining and legal mining. And this Mandiodo site, this is just Konawe Utara, not yet Konawe, not yet included Wedawai. So if you look at the government's website, this is just the legal one, not the illegal yet. Here, Konawe Utara, there are already a lot of players here, both new players and emerging players. All players such as Antam, our largest state-owned mining companies, and then Boso Si Pratama, Bosowa Mining. This is actually linked to Yusuf Kala and his family, his relative here. And Bumi Nickel Nusantara Cinta Jaya also linked to powerful local police that are apparently also linked to executive elites, which is in Istana, in presidential palace. So this is more like emerging local business and national elites are being reconnected under one interest, shared interest, which is supply nickel to Chinese smelter. And in Mandiodo, here, for example, here, both legal, illegal, just operating side by side. And then later on, they will feed all the nickel ore to the ship that is ready to being transported to the smelter located in Konawe. And then Konawe is the big one. Sorry, I need to protect my informant. So at least you can see me here. So this is Mandiodo, and as you can see, the water is already very highly polluted here. And this is the ferry that already, the ship that already, that is ready to wait for the nickel to be transported to this OAS steel making plant. And it's not only to this factory, but also to the factory located in Morowali, etc., etc. But the thing is that when it comes to Chinese companies, they won't care whether the nickel's coming from legal or illegal mining. So they are really dovetailing well with the Indonesian nickel politics nickel players, because what they care more is more about the volume, as much as they can get to supply their vertical production. Because in this factory, even though it's written here, steel making plant, but actually within the plant, there are a lot of business going on. It's not only a steel making plant, but also even biochemical industry here, petrochemical. So that's the grandiosity of Chinese business, to be able to set up vertical productions that can absorb our nickel supply and bring short-term material benefits for both illegal and legal players here, both including that loose alliance that I just mentioned. What time is it? Okay. Yeah. So I will just skip here. But of course, what I'm about to say here is that, we can see the loose alliance here, like the police, emerging elites, or even nationally connected palace people. Here, the executive power here also. Of course, they are not static, they are very dynamic, because there's always contestation and compromises happening. Like we can, like what we observed early this year. This is quite huge news in Indonesia. Those of you who follow Indonesian extractive business should be familiar with this news. And as we can see how Indonesian nickel politics is getting closer to the executive discretionary power. So it's no longer follow the market discipline, market rules, even though US, Australia is already begging Indonesia to reduce the volume of their nickel production, because there are a lot of mining in Western Australia already being forced to shut down because they are not able to compete with Indonesian nickel output, and the price becomes so low. But still, Indonesian government rather follow discretionary power of the state to reorganize material, but to share the spoils between different forces in Indonesia. And because they know in Chinese vertical integration will always work for Indonesia at best. And this is one of example. Faster. Of how Balil was being tasked by Jokowi to arrange and revoke mining permits that are deemed not productive any longer. But interestingly, not being productive, not based on exact technocratic criteria in the ministry level or based on international standard, but it's by Balil itself. So here we can see, interestingly, at the time Balil was still the Minister for Investment. He completely bypassed the traditional line of authority, the energy and mineral resources industry. So if we see the domestic internal conflict at the domestic level here, the interesting side of the story is that we can see how the state institutions are being transformed here as well, thanks to nickel booming industry in Indonesia. Right now, the Ministry of Investment, the authority is just getting blurred. And even the Balil also at the time act as the Energy and Mineral Resources Ministry. And the rest of the story, I think I don't have time to explain, but at least this open up new contestation and compromise. But the key things here is rather on the compromises, because at the time there were also a lot of established conglomerates affected by these presidential regulations, but they are willing to compromise, even though somehow they lose certain shares because perhaps they need to share the spoil at the end. But at least all these people tend to consolidate their interests, even though they need to sacrifice a little bit, and become the winning and willing coalitions for this nickel industry. This is part of the upstream sector that involve Bakri, Luhut, and Sandiaga Uno. And the last section of my presentation is about de-risking of what we have been seeing, the shifting role of the state here and state institutions. In Europe, Daniele Gabor is now has a very provocative work on energy transition politics in European countries, and she argued that de-risking is very important for the state to achieve energy transition. De-risking means that state burden the risk that should have been burdened by private sectors, but now the state will play a role to tinker with the risks or returns on private investment in the form of sovereign bonds, currency, social infrastructure, or most recently green industry, to ensure that the project is investable. So this sounds more like technocratic assumptions, and probably in the European context it works, and how the state provide financing guarantee to ensure that renewable energy project that is very capital intensive work and can be investable. But the thing is that in Indonesia, de-risking doesn't work in that way. As we can see just now from the power structure that I show in the earlier slide, we do have Ministry of Finance who already prepare a lot of de-risking instrument for private investor to come to Indonesia and invest in solar power plant, in hydropower, in wind turbine, blah, 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 but it doesn't work. And all the monies, all the state subsidy goes into nickel industry. And the recent report by the Jakarta Post also estimate about $131 million already being allocated for this nickel industry, while only $1 million being allocated for renewable energy like solar plant and other renewable industry that is more green than that is greener than the EV itself. So what I argue here is more about selective de-risking. Why? Because the state becomes so selective. They just de-risk for the de-risking instrument only work for particular interests in Indonesia. So it's not necessarily about how to make sure green project is being investable or not, but it's rather to make sure how particular interests are being accommodated and can work on this, can help fit into this democratic institution in Indonesia. So about democratic institution, I will explain more later if I have time. But as we can see here, even though international actors like JETP, Just Energy Transition Partnership, the US, Japan already forced the government that let us help you to pass out the coal power plant, early retirement for the power plant, but the state still able to exclude the term and exclude particularly the captive power plant and remove it from the list that is being passed out. The captive power plant that is powering our HPAL smelter in Morowali, in Wedabay. Okay. So this is the crux of my argument, how the de-risking, selective de-risking state actually reconsolidate green transition coalitions, which is the EV stakeholders, and internalize particular business sector or interests, as well as electoral groups within state institutions. Electoral groups here is linked to political candidates and those who are riding Indonesian democratic institutions such as regional election or general elections, because all the nickel monies, of course, are used to fund the campaign itself. So if we still can recall what Riyadi said last week in Indonesian updates, that our democratic are died, and then omnibus actually didn't really result in the increase in the investment. But actually what I argue here is rather where is it? This one. Sorry. Yeah, so this one, the omnibus here. So perhaps at the broader scale, omnibus doesn't result in meaningful liberalizations, but actually it works for certain interests in Indonesia, especially in the HPAL smelter, because it's already evidence that it managed to push for liberalizations in the HPAL smelter in Indonesia, and that's why China can own almost full ownership for the smelter. And it's also bring benefits for the coal companies, because there will be fiscal incentive, particularly in the form of an exception from royalty payments, if they meet the need for industrial raw materials. It means that captive power plants, these coal conglomerates doesn't need to pay royalty for the government, because they have our industry to grow. And as long as they also gain approval from the Minister of Finance. And this is also linked to my core argument just now, how this ministry, all of them, are being dragged into executive power, and they now being the important agencies of discretionary power in Indonesia that underwrite Indonesian energy transition regime and policy. And this is also one of presidential regulations, the recent one that actually allows an exclude captive plan from coal pass out plan, that as long as these captive plans can be can bring benefit for national strategic projects. And of course, our smelter are being listed as national strategic projects. Okay. So this is also about selective de-risking instrument that I mentioned, how everything about market creating subsidies and industrial promotion subsidy speak to particular interests in Indonesia. So it doesn't necessarily about help all private sector to de-risk their green investment in Indonesia. It's only work for certain interests in Indonesia, but still de-risking. Okay. Yeah, and this is also linked to the arguments that I mentioned, how under the second term of President Jokowi, we can see the energy transition regime, especially the one that is linked to EV industry, managed to gather all key ministry under one umbrella, which is resource nationalism and green developmentalist strategy. It's completely different from the power structure that we see before, the one for renewable energy that include Minister for Finance, MEMR, and SOE, but it seems like they speak different language. But here, as we can see here, there is much more coherent here, and all of them are the concrete example or case in point how discretionary power happening and reshape the trajectory of green developmentalists in Indonesia. Okay. And the conclusion, what's next? So I would like to conclude my presentations by talking about the contradiction of capitalisms. As we can see here, seems like the downstreaming first already become the new growth strategy for Indonesia, but apparently it's result in new crisis or even poly-crisis, if I may say, because it doesn't necessarily lead to vertical integration for our business, for our critical mineral industry or EV industry, but also it lead to the new social and environmental crisis, like what other scholars already mentioned many times. And this is what also perhaps we need to see in the next few months. We have new president come to power soon. Like a few months ago, the coal mining license already being shared to other religious group, and it takes this how to say, the religious group also now being dragged into this new winning and willing coalition. So we are not sure how it's going to be happening in the nickel politics or nickel policy domain. And yeah, this is what I see here is more looks like neo-extractivism that actually reconsolidate democratic institution in Indonesia. Perhaps Ed Marcus here will not agree with me that as we can see from the critical political economy lens, our democratic institutions probably are not functional if we use international benchmark to measure it. But actually from the certain point of view or certain interest is actually functional for making sure that our democracy work, because thanks to this interest, thanks to this consolidation of interest, particularly at local level, they fit into regional elections and make sure that the regional elections with the money politics work. And so in a very indirect way, Chinese capital actually fit our democratic institutions. Yeah. And then the winning and willing coalition. So this is also reminds me of the argument made by my friend Kim Sung-yong from Macquarie University. He's not from critical political economy. His approach is much more informed by institutionalism, which is developmental states. And in one of his recent paper, he argued how Korea can push for 60% of renewable energy project in the country thanks to hybridized industrial ecosystem, where the state and the private sector working together to push for energy innovations and willing to create disruptive transformations. But what I can see in Indonesia is that our key conglomerates are not ready yet to make the very transformative or innovative breakthrough, because technically speaking, economically wise, our conglomerates here are aiming for short-term benefits instead of productivity and vertical integrations. We do have coal conglomerates, but they don't have any meaningful vertical integrations that can help push through the policy innovation in Indonesia. And yeah, the losers, who are they? Are they really losers? But we need to see in the next few years, because those who are losers nowadays, such as Japanese interests who are being abandoned in Indonesia, they are probably will also try to find new strategy to reconsolidate their position in Indonesia. And then the China factor itself, this is more like theoretical contributions, that how Chinese capital here must be measured and must be assessed more into within the domestic politics itself. They are strongly embedded within the social relations of mining and sit in the spectrum of predatory developmental state in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia. For question, let's take 2 questions first from the room, and then we go to online. Questions or comments? Frank, where are you going, Frank? No, sorry. You have quick. Go. You have comment? Just quick. No?
I was going to skip out.
Oh, sorry. Any other? Yeah, Riyandi.
Thank you, Tricia. I learned a lot by hearing this presentation. A lot of good data information there. I have a simple question about the risking, but I want to hear your opinion more about China, the risking, because you're saying now we are participating more into producing nickel that can be used as a battery cathode, right? Battery component. In your opinion and in your perspective, should we do China the risking now and move toward Australia and abandoning China into supply chain now, or just wait and see? Wait and see, and yeah, so what's your comment?
Can you hold on? So let's
Yeah.
take another one. Mas Budi. Yeah. So, Ed? Okay, Ed, go ahead.
So, thanks, Chair. As I understand it, your argument is about, I think you said it's a selectively used state, and it's been doing a lot of de-risking in the area of nickel production, and then in the end, the reason for that is of the political economy considerations you explained, like the entrenched politically connected business interests and so on. It's not, I guess it's not a really surprising sort of argument. It's sort of the argument that the critical political economy give for almost any question regarding political economy. The answer is always the same, right? So I guess I would ask, so how does that explain, how does that explain the lack of similar de-risking in energy transition? So, because presumably the beneficiaries, there was a lot of, investment of policy, state finances, backing, etc., into green transition. Also, the beneficiaries would be the same groups, right? It would still be the same politically connected interest groups. So I don't quite understand. I mean, because you framed your arguments in terms of the failure to make the transition. I guess I don't quite understand how your basic argument about the nature of Indonesia's political economy really explains that in a very basic way.
Okay.
You can take those two first.
Oh, two first.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Riyad. So you are asking me about this, right? Okay, where is it? I think this is first. So are you asking me on this part or just now about the lithium?
Presentation where you mentioned that now we are specifically more into China's EV supply chain because we're producing using the HPAL technology more and more. Because you mentioned also the US Critical Mineral Alliance and also the changing policy in the EU, right? So they are now banning more material from foreign entity of concern. But should we choose that strategy now to the risk now, considering that China is getting more important, right, in the supply chain? It's almost impossible to get out of the chain if you want to participate efficiently. Should we do it now or just maybe wait and see and just wait and really implement our bebas active policy?
Bebas active policy. Yeah, I'm not really an avid believer of bebas active policy. Because for me, non-alignment itself, the practical outcome of non-alignment is still being reshaped by what happened in the domestic politics, and the dynamics of social relations between different groups will reshape the practical outcomes of our non-alignment. But that's one different story. But about whether we should start diversifying our stakeholders in HPAL smelter, I'm not sure you are asking me on behalf of academics or observer. But as an observer, I do see the traction among the government, Indonesian government, how they start negotiating with China, leveling up playing field so that China is willing to divest small amount of their shares to our mining companies, right? But again, China is being China. 1%, sacrificing 1% of your nickel industry shares means a lot, and it's already equivalent to metric tons of productions. So I think this is more about the bargaining power between China and Indonesia, and I think it's worthy of investigations how the Prabowo government will bring this into table. And we also waiting for the US election as well, whether Bidenomics still will carry much weight in these global energy transitions. Or perhaps we have another plot twist from Trump. Yeah, so I think that's hopefully I can ask you questions. And then about add questions, and thank you so much. It's very constructive, and now I'm even thinking that it's actually worth developing another paper to compare de-risking the real energy transitions project with EV battery project. But the temporary questions that or responses that I can present today is still here, how I differentiate. Okay. So thankfully, I didn't present this just now, so I can keep this for responses. So this is how I distinguish my readings on de-risking in the traditional energy transition structure in Indonesia and de-risking in EV industry in Indonesia. So actually why I start and have been studying on this EV nickel industry is also because I was studying on coal power plant in Indonesia for my PhD. And as you said, all the players actually say these coal conglomerates, or just like top 20 conglomerates in Indonesia listed in Forbes, all of them are involved both in coal power plant and in EV industry. So what make them differences is just, so this is my answer. If we see on the IPP sector, that was the target of energy transition in the past. And IPP sector, if you are familiar with independent power producer, how the power generation in Indonesia was open for foreign investment, and it's coal power plant, and they call it ultra critical super power plant. And at the time, before COVID time, the government said it's clean coal because it used sophisticated technology, state of the art from China and Japan that can convert our coal and then have lower emissions. So that's how they reframed the green coal at the time. And the de-risking instrument that they used were centered on Minister of Finance. And at the time, the de-risking instruments, that's what we know today as SME, Sarana Multi-Infrastructure Indonesia, and then IIGF, Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund. And everything were being formulated over, I think it took 5 years for all World Bank, Japanese government, including JICA, JBIC, and some of our Indonesian key minister at the time was led by Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs and Ministry of Finance. And that's how they reformulate all the instruments that allow for PPP, public-private financing, in the green coal power plant that is ultra super critical power plant. And that's where China, Japan, Korea companies managed to come to Indonesia and secure and lock in agreement with PLN 25 years. And their investment were being guaranteed until now. So at least for the next, so we still have at least 20 years to go. Their profit already being guaranteed. All through instruments that are centered in this technocratic minister, if we may say. But about nickel industry, even though the players are same, or let's say we remove Japan from the list in this nickel industry, we see the growing of authoritarian neoliberalisms in Indonesia. Even though they use the omnibus law, that was actually, if we trace back the development of omnibus law, is actually derived from policy prescription from the World Bank in Indonesia before COVID time, when the World Bank asked Indonesia to reform their regulations to make it more foreign investment friendly. But it turns out that the omnibus, being controlled under a tiny elite in Jakarta, the discretionary power of president, and everything must be come under presidential regulations, then being implemented by the minister. That's what the next slide that I showed just now, a lot of derivative regulations that are being executed under ministerial levels, from finance, industry, Ministry of Energy, trade even, but it's all done under discretionary power of Jakarta elites, not through the exact institutions that was happening in the past. Yeah, I think that's my response.
And let's take two more, Mas Budi and Mbak Rini, and then we go online.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Very comprehensive. So number one is that I'm a bit uncomfortable the way that you frame this issue from the perspective of green developmentalism. I mean, even in the perspective that is much smaller, energy transition developmentalist, I'm actually not that comfortable, because those who work on energy think that the transition is not about the EV. So the transition is about how we use the resources from non-renewable into renewable. And the choice that we use it to transfer to electricity because of convenience. We have alternative. Yeah, we keep doing it in mechanic. We can change to hydrogen. But one is the most convenient is electricity. And so then we got this indication on storage. But we could develop those storage. And if you look at that system, nickel is not unique. There are other critical minerals that actually used to implement those systems. For example, we're going to use a lot of DC generator. Now, in DC generator, there is a mineral that is actually needed to make the DC motor working. And just people do not talk much about that. Yeah, it just happened that we exploit the issue of nickel. But that mineral also have the same problem as nickel, limited resources and so on. So I thought that, putting this as a setup of energy transition would be too much. Probably better just the usual mining issue, and I actually agree that all this pollution between government, conglomerate to lower the risk is happening everywhere in most of the mining activity. And it just now is being politicized much bigger than, for example, in the era of 2000 on coal mining or before on. So the issue is more why, and to me, the issue is why now is actually easy to make it much bigger political issue. Because all the environmental implication just the same when we do coal. Just the illegal, just the same. Just all the pollution, just the same. But just the political intention is much bigger in nickel.
Okay, let's take Mari's question.
Yeah, thank you, Trisha. Very comprehensive presentations. I learned so much as well from your presentations. And I'm interested in one of your statement that, well, when you were in Konawe, you told that, well, Chinese companies, basically they are interested in getting enough nickel to, to fit into the vertical industries. So they don't care about whether it's legal or illegal. So my question is actually, so far from what you found based on your research and interviews, do you think there's any difference between Chinese, driven investment in terms of their ESG standards on the ground, or with the other, European-based investment? Because I asked this question, and usually we know the answers, right? But in the academic world, we need to balance that whether we will be categorized into, part of the China fear-mongering that is, conform to the Western narrative that all the China's businesses are good, or whether, well, actually, what we found on the ground are like this. So how do you manage that delicate balance?
Over to you.
Yes. Yeah, I will ask any questions. I will respond to any questions first about the differences between Chinese ESG standard and Western ESG standard. So just a long story short, I visit the smelter and some of Indonesian worker actually, they were working for Western mining before, because in 2016 a lot of Western companies just withdrew from Indonesian mining industry, right? And so now some of them, the most experienced one, for example, already become the manager and running the industry along with the Chinese workers. And I do ask them, what do you think about your work and your past experience in this XX company and now with China? And they do admit that, yeah, there are some huge differences, but I don't know how to say this, but it seems to me that there is quite huge optimisms among them that China is learning, even though there were some accused regarding labor standard, like last time what happening in Morowali last year, and also about this ESG itself. But according to the first-hand informations that China is learning, that's what they say. But again, as an academic, what I see here is more about we should not really trap in binary dichotomies, China ESG and Western ESG, because this industry is an enclave. They just located in literally in an area that also where a lot of new communities growing, and they're also is surrounded by political machine like regent, city mayor, governor, whose political games also reshape what we call this ESG standard and practices. For example, near the Konawe, we call it uang debu, sand money. So even though, so every day there always nickel being transported, right, to the smelter, and it's like the dust was just like extraordinary, like polluted. But they do have uang debu. Well, the companies will pay surrounding communities, the head of the village, for the compensations for creating debu along the way. And they're happy with it. So I think this is against, it speaks to my final arguments that talking about Chinese ESG, be it Western or Chinese ESG, is strongly embedded within the domestic social relations surrounding the enclave of the mining. Yeah, and about Pak Budi, tough questions. Yeah, I do think the green developmentalist strategy is quite problematic, and I think it also depends from how we underpin, how we extrapolate the term itself. Because if we look at different journals, articles, they do have different definitions. And even in China, like the green developmentalists in China, they even somehow make it equivalent to ecological civilizations, whatever the Chinese government say. And here, perhaps my stance is more into how I start the entry points of my research, because I try to look into what the elites in Jakarta reframe their strategy and what the social relations behind it. But yeah, I think Pak Budi comments is a kind reminder for me to make my research more, written in a more plain language and have more clarified terms. Yeah, thank you.
Wendy, do we have questions?
Thank you. So we have 36 online participants here, and we have 2 questions. The first one is from Joshua Walker. He said about, do EV value chain and EV ecosystem make sense as analytic or descriptive terms in Indonesia? I wonder if they are discursive or ideological terms that disguise the lack of an integration between an export-oriented nickel sector and a domestic EV industry that is mostly using LFP batteries rather than HCM batteries. And then the second one is from Robert. He asked, which ministries or departments are involved in the GATP Secretariat Group from the Indonesian government? That's all.
Thank you.
Mm.
Any other questions from the room? Marcus? And then Eve.
Can you talk a bit more about the state-owned enterprises? Because you had this one line where you said they remained in the driver's seat, but then you have here this chart that says actually the smaller ones without the employees seem to hold the majority of the concessions, but probably in this larger scheme of things, the employees are bigger. But can you talk a bit more how this exactly works? Are the SOEs still involved in every single project in some way, or is there a clear separation?
Can we take another one?
Yes, yes.
You take a note, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Eve.
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking more about the way you use the term de-risking, and how different it looks in a country like Indonesia compared to other places. And I think you could probably do a bit more, I guess, conceptual work there. I mean, one thing that struck me is that in Indonesia, you sort of have this table that, you know, which basically look like a list of incentives, I think tax breaks and incentives, rather than other sorts of things that like types of de-risking that goes on in other countries. But can't you sort of think about informality as well, and informal types of de-risking? I mean, you know, a lot of these big deals in the smelting sector and the nickel smelting sector, they're de-risked by bringing on political elites and giving them shares, and you know, they end up being formal, but they're kind of, I will protect your interests if you do business with me. And so I think you can kind of make something more of that. You know, what does de-risking look like in the global south, in middle income countries with heavy involvement of oligarchic factors? Well, it's informal in many ways as well, from the top to the bottom. So you can do more of that. It's more of a comment, I guess.
Okay. Okay. From Marcos first about SOEs. Not this one. I think it's the upstream downstream one, right? So slow. Okay, type edges. Yeah, this one. Okay, it's here our SO is Antam, IBC Indonesia Battery Corporations. That's the main SOE actors here, and PL and Pertamina are more likely involved in the upstream, in the downstream, the infrastructure one, more into the supporting one. But talking about Antam, they have been the long-standing players in this industry. Antam used to have hold mining license in Sulawesi as well. It's gold mining license. And this is why just now I also briefly mentioned there is a shifting modes of productions here, because Antam they also reuse their mining license and expand the use of the mining territory into nickel as well. So Antam, somehow the news quite exaggerating Chinese dominance in nickel minings, and even some news that I don't think it's verified enough, but saying that China hold bigger shares in the mining industry, which is literally nickel mines. But actually Chinese companies do not really own much in nickel mines, but our SOEs hold controls over nickel mines. And if you see the list of the data coming from Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, and there's also data from Nickel Association in Indonesia. Our Antam, like the SOEs in Indonesia, Antam, hold bigger mining acre in Indonesia, the biggest one actually. So it's not Chinese companies. Chinese company rather are the buyers of the nickel output in Indonesia. And talking about IBC, IBC is the consortium of 4 state-owned companies in Indonesia, including Pertamina as well. Antam, Pertamina, and Inalum, and the other one, I forgot, PLN. But there are 4 of them, and this is Then there are IBC, Indonesia Battery Corporations. But the idea of setting up IBC 2 years ago by President Jokowi is rather to hold control over the midstream one, which is the battery production, the cathode battery cell production. So technically speaking, it seems to me that Indonesian government still want SOE holds control over Indonesian nickel mining. So they put Antam in the upstream levels, while actually Antam, compared to other mining license holder, they own more concession compared to others. But in the mainstream sector, IBC also control over the shares. But IBC performance is still being questioned. Actually, we still need to wait and see whether IBC really can hold control over the midstream one. But at least one of recent developments on IBC is that whenever Hyundai, Chinese company, want to set up the factory for battery cell cathode in Indonesia, they need to set up joint venture with IBC. The government language is that to make sure there is a technology transfer here and also make sure there is local content requirements, something like that. So that's the gist of SOE's role in Indonesian nickel ecosystem. And about online, is EV value chain ecosystem make sense, or are they just ideological? If in terms of economic value, I don't know the exact answer, because of course the ideal framing here is that government would like to move up value chain. If anything, they want Indonesia to be part of everything here, from upstream, midstream to downstream. But seems like it's quite hard to realize, because again, we don't have enough capacity, and even our conglomerates who control over Indonesian economy doesn't have capacity for pursuing vertical integrations. And also our SOEs capital holdings is quite limited as well. But of course, if you ask me whether it's very ideological or not, yes, indeed it's very ideological, because it's linked again to resource nationalisms and how the government justify all the discretionary policy actions taken by national elites under the moniker of resource nationalisms. And indeed, it's very politically popular itself. But by my very simple answer about whether it really brings benefit to Indonesian national economy is that some data actually mention, I think I need further investigate the data, verify the data, but at least there are some data that I read through, and also I confirm with some policymakers why Indonesia survived during COVID time. At least we are not experience recessions or economic downturn, is because our nickel output at the time, ferronickel, iron, NPI, nickel pig iron, that actually contribute to the national growth and make sure the economy is still going. And then the second one, which ministry being involved in JETP, this is very interesting, because the ministry who are being involved in JETP is also the one who is courting investment for nickel, which is coordinating minister for maritime and investment affairs. And the head of the JETP, Pak Edo, task force, is also actually directly being assigned to the ministry, coordinating minister for maritime and investment affairs. So I think this is the interesting policy landscape in Indonesia, especially during Jokowi's second terms, that everything now slowly, progressively going back to national-based discretionary power in Istana, and Menteng and Monas. Thank you.
Do you want to comment on Eve's comment?
Oh yeah, Eve comments. The informality components, it's very interesting, and thank you for that, Eve. And as we know, Lian Sinclair is coming next week as well. So actually, I'm trying to co-authoring a paper with her on this de-risking, because we do found that we did find our last paper on environmental politics. The selective de-risking has a lot of flaws that a lot of components need to be clarified. And I think the informality, perhaps we can just term it in a different way, like illicit activities or political alliance or whatever it is, but this is very helpful. And thank you so much.
Just to repeat on that note, so next week we will have another ISG very related topic. It's on extractivism in Indonesia, and he will chair it. It's with Liam Sinclair. So make sure you come if you're interested in this topic next week, same time. And also tomorrow we have another one, another special ISG on election and disinformation by Monica Wiharja. We still have time for a couple more questions. Any questions? Yes, please.
I think I want to jump on Mas Riandi's question earlier. Do you think we have reached the point of no return where Indonesia cannot attract more investment from Western countries without first dissociating ourselves from China? Because from the narrative that you say in the presentation, it seems like you said that Indonesia doesn't want to dissociate itself from China, but the narrative that I heard from government officers said that Indonesia actually want to diversify the source of its supply chain. Like Indonesia try to make a limited FTA with US, but to go there. Do you think one of the reasons because deeply influenced with China?
Can you hold on? Can I check if there is another?
We still have questions here from Arvitia Edward Yeremia. So he asked about how do you see the latest development in China regarding the economic slowdown? How should we anticipate this China factor? To what extent do you think China's economic situation might create change in Indonesia's legal politics in the long run?
Yeah. Okay. Result whether it's living northern, northern. Yeah. Yeah, we do have read a lot of news, right? That our government is seeking to diversify our investment partner. Whether it's really too late to diversify or not. But I think one component that we forgot to mention here is about the capacity of Western companies themselves. Even though, let's say, our government really committed to polish their ESG standard and even hold companies accountable to what they have been doing in their mining processing activities. But if the other component, like the other partners, like Western countries, like BHP, Billiton, and if they are not able to meet the capital expenditures that we require to open up new mines, process the smelter, etc., it's not going to. It's hard. It still remains it remains a key challenge for both parties, even though Indonesia already provide the foundations and agreed to meet certain requirements of ESG. So the problem here is more about how the geopolitical mindset that is being portrayed through the news actually didn't reflect the entire story on the ground. So even though the leaders, US leader, European policymakers attack Indonesia from the ESG point of view, labor abuse, blah, 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 but the company themselves are speaking different language here. The HPAL smelter that China developed in Indonesia, it's happened because they are able to supply low cost labor as well, right, from China to build the smelter. And they also have subsidy from the Chinese government to make it happen. But the Australian or the US miners, it's still very hard because they don't have strong state figure behind their investment yet. So I think the mineral security partnership that I mentioned just now about 16-country alliance led by the US, and now they want to create their new de-risking strategy to enable the opening of new mining in some countries. I think this can be the new subject of research, whether they can use this new, like these joint forces perhaps can outcompete Chinese subsidies for new HPAL smelter. And what Yere questions? Yeremia, right? Yeah, Yere. How do we see Chinese economic slowdown here? Of course, it affects, if I'm not mistaken, it affects stainless steel. because the construction in China, like economic downturn and also the bankruptcy of top Chinese contractor like Evergrande does affect Chinese macroeconomic and affect construction sector that not only affect Indonesian stainless steel export actually, but also Malaysian stainless steel in Malaysia as well. So stainless steel import got affected by the economic slowdown in China. But about the nickel itself, I think Chinese companies are so innovative and always seek to diversify their business, not only in EV. Even though here, recently we hear a lot of news how the sales of EV keep decreasing both in Europe and the United States. But Chinese companies actually seek to diversify their business, not only in EV, but also in other sectors that also require battery. And I think we should, this is not a, there is no quick answer to these questions because we need to wait and see. And talking about Chinese companies is very unpredictable, and because they have a very strong policy breakthrough and R&D as well as the patent rights mentality, it's very hard to see whether the decreasing sales of EV really affect Chinese risk appetite in nickel production. Thank you.
2 minutes there.
One question, in terms of this pollution, how strong you think that the Chinese company determine the shape of the pollution?
Pollution.
Yeah, so they actually determine the role that we are going to do, we play this way. And how strong actually this Chinese company in the case of nickel?
Yeah, I think there is no single answer for that, but because I managed to different companies and different lawyers as well who have been observing this kind of development for a long time, and it seems to me that different companies have different level of commitment and also different level of risk appetite in committing aligning their business activities with ESG standard, because it's the high compliance to ESG means that they need to reduce the profit margin of their business activities, right? There are some of them who are really committed to improve their ESG standard, but there are still some of them who try to, if I may say, it's more like ESG washing, like just fuse their CSR activities into ESG just because they already built the road, they already built the mosque, school, and training. They said it's already part of ESG. So there are a lot of nuances here that we should not neglect.
Okay, our time is up now, so please join me in thanking Tricia.
Thank you. It's very intense. Thank you, Pak Jo.